And we are back with the ElseWords. This is our big discussion topic of the week, and we are going to talk comics and movies, but not mention Dad's Comics or Marvel Comics. We're not going to talk DC or Marvel with this. We are going to talk the other publishers that have been in the news with.
We're going to see if somebody else can make a comic superhero movie work.
Yeah.
Or a comic franchise movie.
So we're going to hit the first bit here is, and because these are all stories that are short, but they're tied together. So DMG Entertainment has acquired all of Valiant Comics. They are the people behind my pick 2-3 weeks ago of Quantum and Woody, and also, you know, Exo Man of War. They've done stuff like Faith, Ninjak, and gosh, there's a whole bunch of others in there as well.
Faith is actually, I've been seeing some clothing line based off of her image on ThinkGeek.
Yeah, so that's one. I think that's part of this thing here. But the big thing with this is basically DMG, run by founder and CEO Dan Mintz, already had 57%. They just basically bought out the other 43. Like, yeah, why not?
DMG has acquired Valiant, the company. You know, Valiant has gone through quite a few hands. We've talked a little bit before about in the 90s they got acquired by Acclaim and were republishing and starting out a lot of books, and that's when characters like Quantum Woody came about. The Valiant characters, some of the earlier ones, I don't even think are at Valiant anymore. They were Gold Key characters that have been picked up by another company, Turok and Solar and things. But there's always a chance that they might wind up back in the same universe again. And this is interesting because Valiant Comics right now are seen as being very, very good. I don't hear anybody talking about Valiant Comics and not saying that they really enjoy them and have compared them highly favorably over a lot of the Marvel output and even the DC output, up at least until DC had their Rebirth stuff. So no one's excited to see anything change at Valiant itself. They're curious to see how much is going to affect the comics day-to-day versus what seems to be the bigger thing, which is how do we get these characters up on the screen? And there's been a little bit of that going forward already. I know Ninjak was supposed to have an online series. Exo Man of War, I think, is one of the ones that's been picked up for a movie at some point. This is the company that was putting a lot of stake into Valiant already, saying, hey, we really believe in this. We just want to own you outright so we can take care of all this. You know, we'll bankroll everything, but we'll also get the gains from it in the long run. And that makes a certain degree of sense. What I'm not hearing so far with the Valiant stuff that's been announced is a shared universe thing necessarily. It seems like the Ninjak show is its own entity versus Exo versus Bloodshot, whatever else comes out. If they do a Quantum and Woody, these things standing on their own. I feel like when I read Archer and Armstrong, there were strong ties to some of the other characters, like Eternal Warrior, I think was a big part of it. I think he was actually a relative of Armstrong. So I don't know how much it can stay separate if you want to fully explore these characters. But then it took a lot of years of Michael Keaton Batman movies and Christopher Reeve Superman movies and Wonder Woman TV series before we finally started seeing some of those characters team up on screen. It was a lot of years of separate Spider-Man movies and X-Men movies and everything else. Oh, wait, those are mostly still separate. But still, you get what I'm saying is that the shared universe thing, while it feels like that's everything right now because Marvel has done it so much and DC's finally gotten around to it, it's still kind of new. It's still not a thing that we're used to having. So maybe it takes a few shots for Valiant to do that.
And this is where I honestly have to give them credit because they're doing this, you know, getting this stuff out there because they have this benefit of the fact that no one really knows a lot about them. You know, a lot of people don't know about, you know, Quantum and Woody or you know, Harbinger or, you know, a lot of these properties. So they're like, well, let's just do these good. So for example, they already have in the works right now, you know, Harbinger and Bloodshot are set over at Sony, with Bloodshot being having Vin Diesel attached to star. Quantum and Woody, which is a favorite of CEO Dan Mintz, or I think it's Dan, he likes that show. It's in development as a TV show with the Russo brothers, Getaway Productions. And then Dr. Mirage is also set to be a TV series with CBS Studios and the CW network. So they're doing all these things in these other properties, in these other mediums. Like I think what was it, Ninjak versus the Valiant universe was going to be the online thing, because of the fact that I remember hearing about that because it had Jason David Frank from Power Rangers
Correct.
attached with it. I think he was going to play Ninjak.
I believe that was the case. Yes.
Yeah. So I mean, it's one of these things, like with it, and it's with this and with all this stuff. I'm like, all the stories we're here that we're gonna have. It's like, if it's gonna be good, great. I'd love to see a Quantum and Woody TV series. I'd love to see an Archer and Armstrong's movie franchise.
I really enjoyed Archer and Armstrong. That's one that I would love to see. I would probably like to see it as a Netflix series or something.
Yeah.
Because the stories have a depth and length to them that I think works.
And so, I think it's really cool. The other part is that is a rumor, but this all stems from Mark Millar signing with Netflix. So Millar World is owned by Netflix now, I believe was how the deal went. And
Mark Millar, we know Mark from doing things like Kick-Ass and Wanted and The Kingsman.
Yep.
And he's had several high-profile movies come out, including 2 of them that have had sequels. So he's done very well. Most of his stuff was being published either through Image or some of the stuff originally Marvel, but they were all creator-owned properties, along with his co-creators, the artists on the books, which is kind of the big thing. Now, the properties that have already come out, meaning Hit Girl and Kick-Ass and Kingsman and probably Wanted, are not included in this. But he's had a lot of other properties that have existed that are under this bannerhead that Netflix, basically, they bought out Mark Millar's creativity, the stuff that he's developed before that wasn't already sold or being in development with another company, and stuff going forward. He's going to keep continuously making new ideas for them, and it's exclusive to Netflix. So he's had books that are not really superhero based, like American Jesus, which was originally called Chosen. But he's had a lot of other things like Starlight, I think was one that was kind of a future Flash Gordon thing of Flash Gordon has retired on Earth to marry the Eve Arden, I think is the character name. And she's now passed. And so he wants to come out of retirement and go back into saving the universe and stuff. His kids don't believe any of his stories were real. So it's a little bit like The Incredibles, a little bit Don Quixote, but it's a sweet story. He also did another one about a superpowered character that was kind of, I don't know if he was challenged, but he was a little bit simple-minded. And it was like he would go around and he would try to do one good thing every day. And I never read the actual book, but it was one of those things that would come up, and like Millar went through a phase of being kind of overly grotesque, hyper-violent stories, and then he started doing stuff that was a little bit closer to being sweet and feel-good stories. And it's the thing is that there's a Millar that I find appealing, and then there's a Millar that I find very, very unappealing. His work, not him personally. And so it just depends on what you get. But he keeps making big ideas. Now, some of his things are the kinds of stuff that you go, oh, it's this mixed with this. It's the X-Men as spies. It's Batman if he was a villain. It's those sorts of things. So, and those books will probably be some of the first ones that are in development. It'll depend on what kind of air that he has to it. I don't know, again, if this is a shared universe thing or if this is just Millar's works in their own stories, because a lot of these concepts don't work together as shared. You don't see the Kingsmen crossing over with Kick-Ass. You could, conceivably, but they feel like they're two separate ideas that wouldn't necessarily equal out to being in the same room together. But I wouldn't put it past them. Wanted, same sort of thing. Wanted and Kingsman probably could exist. Mm-hmm. The perfect assassin against the perfect spies. Maybe. It just sort of depends. But it does show that Netflix sees the possibility of comic books and superheroes outside of the Marvel house, especially when Marvel could very well exit Netflix at some point with the whole Disney deal thing.
So this, and the article is coming from Bleeding Cool. They say that all the titles from Millar World, with the exceptions of Kick-Ass, Kingsman, and Hit Girl, which those will be continued to be published by Image Comics, will be published by Netflix Comics. So it's part of it is I think they've changed Millar World to Netflix Comics, which is a smart move, because if it does take off like they're hoping, calling something Millar World or Millar World is going to sort of feel exclusionary in that regard.
Well, I think what it is that Netflix, and this is the other part, is that it's not just Netflix Comics isn't an imprint in Netflix of here's where we take comics properties and put them on the screen. Netflix Comics is actually comic books.
Yes.
This is the bigger story, is that Netflix is saying, oh yeah, all of these properties that we've just gotten rights to, well, we still want to see them published as comics, both the old stuff and new stuff. And where is that stuff going to wind up? Who's going to be the publisher? So they're making their own publishing imprint. And the rumor is that it's going to actually be put out by Dark Horse.
Yeah, so it's weird, because with how it sounds like from the author of the article, that it's going to initially be done through Dark Horse, and then once they get their leggings, then they'll do it themselves or something.
Yeah, but Malibu was kind of like that. Or maybe it was Image was done by Malibu. There was some kind of deal where the company started up and
Image was through Malibu.
Yeah. And then they got their legs, and then they went off and they started doing the stuff on their own. But it was like, we don't have all the startup to make this happen just on its own. It's very expensive. It takes a lot of skill and stuff. You have people who already do this. So we're just going to pay you guys to do this for us until we're ready to take it and run with it. And Dark Horse is a very good company to use. Dark Horse is a premier publisher who a few years ago, unfortunately, lost some of their biggest rights to some of the stories they were doing, because Marvel acquired or Disney acquired Marvel, but also they acquired Star Wars. And so Dark Horse for years had published Star Wars comics, and all those Star Wars comics got pulled to go to Marvel to publish instead, and change the continuity of a lot of things at the same time.
Yep.
So that was a big blow to Dark Horse, but they didn't fold up and die. They started doing other stuff.
No, yeah, it looks like they've lost Star Wars, IDW, Yen, Line Webtoons, and Scholastic, and then they also just lost Conan to Marvel.
Yeah, Conan's gone back and forth a few times. I don't see Conan as being like the big thing, but what I'm more worried about is some of the other properties that Dark Horse has published over the years has been like Predator and Aliens and RoboCop, and Predator and Aliens are both Fox properties, and who just bought out Fox.
So you heard it here first, folks. The whole reason why Disney is buying all these things is so they could fuck with Dark Horse.
But isn't there also a story that I think I saw this week that Dark Horse is going to be publishing Frozen comics?
That wouldn't surprise me, because here ABC has their own publisher.
But that's the thing.
Because I think they're still doing like Darkwing Duck or Donald Duck or one of them comics too. I think.
So a few years ago, Boom Studios had the rights to the Disney characters, not like ownership, but they were publishing Darkwing Duck, Chippendale Rescue Rangers, DuckTales, that kind of stuff. And the Muppet comics, which were excellent. The Roger Language stuff was so good. And then the Disney deal happened with them buying Marvel, and so they pulled all those licenses away. But then Marvel doesn't do kids comics. They just don't know how anymore. They don't have the people. They have plenty of people who are like, oh yeah, I can write the shit out of a Star Wars book, but I can't make heads or tails out of writing a fucking Goof Troop series. They've tried a couple things here and there where they did, like, someone did a series of the Dragon Figment.
Yeah, that was Jim Zub.
Yep. But overall, Marvel and Disney just have not mixed.
Yeah.
And so, first of all, big screw to Boom, who, again, had to go and find and acquire a whole bunch of other stuff to do. They made a lot of their own stuff, doing stuff with Lumberjanes and things, but they also had started doing the stuff with Adventure Time and a bunch of the
Warriors.
Yep, Bravest Warriors, Powerpuff Girls, Samurai Jack, a lot of the Cartoon Network stuff. which is weird because a lot of those properties owned by Warner Brothers, DC,
Yeah.
So it's very weird. But take a company that knows what they're doing. That's the thing, is that you pull the rug out from under this company that's doing great stuff with your Disney properties to pull them back, and then didn't do anything with them. Couldn't do anything with them. So Dark Horse to release original comic series featuring Disney's Frozen. So again, Marvel not going to do a Frozen comic, but we have this. It seems like we should make Frozen comics. Who could do it? Well, they went to Dark Horse. So there's still a working relationship somewhere between Disney and Dark Horse that's able to do stuff. It's just a question of, what do they feel the properties are better served at? Is Predator a good Marvel property, or is it a good license it out to somebody else to do it property?
The next bit is sort of a twofer, but it's Rob Liefeld's Extreme Universe is coming to the big screen. So this is sort of the other end of the spectrum.
This is closer to Marvel and DC.
Yeah.
Some people would say, well, it's just like Marvel except no feet. But in this case, this is all the characters already coexist.
Yeah.
All the characters have crossovers in the books. The big issue with this is that the most well-known book by Extreme Studios and by Rob Liefeld is Youngblood. And Youngblood is not part of this deal because it's already been put into a production promise at another company, I think, over the years. So, but all the other things in the Extreme Universe that Rob has created and had a lot of people work on, Mark Millar being one of them. And, oh God, who else? Oh, your friend from The Walking Dead.
Robert Kirkman.
Yeah, Robert Kirkman has written stuff for Extreme Studios. Alan Moore famously did the Judgment Day comic and then did a really terrific run on Supreme. So all these other characters, Bloodstrike, Blood Wolf, a lot of bloods. You're going to hear a lot of bloods in these. Rejects, Kaboom. Hopefully one of my favorite books that I loved, which was New Men. These things all available to this new on-screen universe.
So here's
Akiva Goldsman.
Yeah, here's the bigger part with this, because I mean, you have Akiva Goldsman, who is setting up the writers' room for this universe. There's the producer joining him with Graham King, and then Chinese outfit Fundamental Films are all partnering on this franchise based on the comic creations. That's where I feel like this is going to be a hit, because I mean, I'm not incredibly familiar with the Extreme Comics line, but it's the superheroes, but they're more edgier, because it was outside
they're not just edgy, they're extreme. So
I wanted to avoid that. They're
right.
extreme.
I know, but this is the whole point. Whenever somebody makes those quotes about the '90s and everything's extreme, that's exactly what this was. This is Rob Liefeld. Rob Liefeld created X-Force, created Deadpool and Cable in New Mutants, and then took New Mutants and finished that book out and spun it off into X-Force, and was part of the exodus of Marvel, of all these high-end, hugely paid, hugely fanned creators, particularly the artists, and they went off and they said, we're not going to work for you anymore. We're going to go and start our own company and do our own shit and own our shit. And then they went over to DC and they said, hey, just so you heard, we've left Marvel. And DC's like, yeah, we can't wait to get you on our books. We're not getting on your books. We're going and creating our own shit. So just like a giant middle finger to both of the biggest companies in comics ever. And so that's kind of like what his whole line was doing Extreme books. When Extreme left Image Comics, now it was the first launch book was Youngblood at Image. But when Extreme left Image Comics because of a falling out between Rob and some of the other creators, he had to rebrand it. So he created Awesome Comics. So it goes from Extreme to Awesome. There was another one, I can't remember, was like his first spinoff that was like, I'm not leaving Image yet, but I want to do this other thing completely too. And I can't remember what that imprint was. But I think that might have been where Evangeline was from.
Now, wasn't Rob Liefeld 23 at this time?
He was very young when he did the Levi's 501 Blues commercial. My fly is buttoned. Yeah, and so there was maybe a little bit of immaturity. Maybe for all the guys there was. But there was also, you go from being a guy who's just going to draw superheroes to being super rich and spending $3 million on a baseball, Todd McFarlane, that was a good investment. You kind of get some chutzpah.
Yeah.
And you also don't necessarily know how to run that kind of business on your own. So the partners all got together and they hired some good people and they did things, but they were all cocky. And so you get that many egos in a room and they're gonna bash heads, and they're gonna, like, somebody's gonna think they're cooler than everybody else.
So honestly, with this, like, looking at this, I mean, because where I read a little bit of the, what was it? Was it Youngblood that relaunched like recently with Image?
Youngblood is one of the ones that relaunched recently with Image. They did a really good run with Glory, and there was another one. Oh, Prophet was another one that had some pretty cool relaunch stuff. But Youngblood was probably one of the most recent ones. He also did a couple Kickstarters of Bloodstrike, I think, was one.
Yeah.
And Brigade might have been another.
But I mean, this is one of the things that, like, where I'm not, like, I read a little bit of like the first couple issues, and I enjoyed the book, the Youngblood book, but at the same time, part of it was I felt like I needed to know a little bit more of the history of Youngblood, and the other part of it was there's a lot of comic books I read, and so it fell low on my list.
Well, that was the point of the relaunch, is that I don't think it was requiring you to know the history as much. And honestly, because there's so many different...
I need to know a little bit.
No, you really didn't. And you're probably better off. One, because the original Youngblood series, not big on story. Man, it was all about the dynamic art. It was all about, here's these characters. Oh, look, somebody's head just got blown off. Hey, that guy looks kind of cool. Oh, he's dead. Because it was just like all out action all the time. It was never about the plot. Comics at that point in time, and they're getting into this right now with this new DC spin-off line with all these artists as the lead creators. It was basically the artist drew the story, and then the writer would come in and fill in the dialogue after. And it was loose plots. It was, here's a plot. Okay, fill out the 24 pages with that plot, and then we'll go back in and we'll make all the stuff work. That was the Marvel style of doing comics. And what happened with the early Image stuff is that there were a lot of cases of the writer didn't really come into play. The artist thought they could write. They thought they could make a cohesive storyline or dialogue, and it didn't always work out that way. Over time, they developed into better things. Todd McFarlane had guest issues where Neil Gaiman wrote a comic, and forgot to fucking pay him like he was supposed to for the creation of Angela. So that didn't work out. Also had issues where Dave Sim came in, where Frank Millar wrote stuff. That was a good move on Todd's part. It gave the book more depth and more gravitas. Jim Lee was very lucky to have Brandon Choi write for Wildcats from the very beginning and develop stories. I think Brandon also wrote the early Stormwatch stuff. Brandon was a decent writer. There was a lot more to the Youngblood, but not the Youngblood, the Wildstorm books at that point than there were some of the other things. I think it was still called Homage at that point. Extreme took a while. When I talk about New Men, the reason why I liked New Men was because the writer on it had some stories that I really dug. I liked his style. That writer was Eric Stephenson, who has long now been the head of Image Comics. I think he was very good, even at that early stage. But like I said, Rob got in bigger names. He got people to start working on the book, like, say, Kurt Busiek was supposed to write Youngblood, Mark Millar. The problem is the books didn't come out, and it was almost always because the art fell behind. I don't think it was ever the writers, although we can definitely say that writers sometimes hold things up. It just seemed like so many times it was, oh, we're launching and it's going to be this big thing. And there were all these promises made, and then the books would just kind of fall the wayside. And that, unfortunately, still seems to happen with Rob stuff today. There are people who complained about the Kickstarter stuff. It's like, I never got my comics, or when's the next issue coming out, or whatever. I think he always intends the best. And so when he went back to Marvel a couple years ago and was doing stuff at DC, where he was writing a few books and drawing a couple of books at the same time, and he was hitting his deadlines every month, and that was with a lot of editorial interference, it was to kind of prove, hey, I can do this. I think it was as much to prove it to himself as it was to the audience. But in the long run, when it comes to extreme books, there still seems to be things where they fall behind. And that's probably because the business needs to be run by somebody too, and that's not where his expertise is. Rob's a very dynamic creator. As a businessman, he can probably do things too, but when he's got to do them both at the same time, I think it suffers. That said, this is a big deal, not so much because of Rob, although I think there's something to be said because Rob's the creator of Deadpool, and Deadpool is like on fire right now. Rob's the creator of Cable. Cable is going to be the next big thing in Deadpool, but it's more about the fact that this is someone bought a universe, and Akiva Goldsman is the guy who's been doing the Transformers movies for Hasbro, the guy who's been trying to launch the new Hasbro line that mixes the Transformers and G.I. Joe and Visionaries and a couple other properties that don't necessarily make sense together, but he really wants a big shared universe. So Hasbro is maybe not the one to do that. Rob's stuff, which is already all these characters know each other and interact with each other, so that's what we get to draw on, that's probably the way to go because it's easier to make that stuff happen. I was talking with someone online today. They were talking about the Universal monsters and why they tried to do this Dark Universe stuff with the Mummy, and before that, actually, they tried to do it with Dracula Untold, and they didn't take off. And I said, well, because these characters were never meant to be interactive with each other. The Wolfman, the Mummy, Dracula, the creature from the Black Lagoon. There's only been 3 cases that I can think of where they interacted. It was the Abbott and Costello meet Frankenstein, which was comedy. It was the Monster Squad, which was comedy. And it was Van Helsing, which wasn't funny how shitty that movie was. So to try to force them into each other because, well, they're Universal monsters, and that's what everybody sees them as, and Universal owns them, so we want to make our own franchise. I just don't know that people are buying into it. Also because the properties are kind of seen as old and quaint at this point. Nobody's freaking out for a new Dracula movie. Nobody's jumping up and down for a new Wolfman. He's not even a werewolf. He's a wolf man. He has nards. We know that.
Wolfman.
Yeah, it's just... So I think Marvel's had the advantage because for 70 years, Captain America knew the Avengers, knew the Fantastic Four, knew the X-Men. DC's had the advantage. They just don't know how to play it. But Wonder Woman and Batman and Superman all have coffee together regularly. And Cal will heat it up when it starts to get cold. And Batman will pay for the extra whipped cream because he's got the bank. A shared universe that pre-exists coming in means that you can make movies into a franchise much easier. Will they be great? I don't know. I have nothing nice to say about the Transformers movies.
Yeah. I mean, that's where it sort of like loses me is because of that.
But Akiva Goldsman has done so many things. And yeah, some of them are truly awful and some of them aren't bad. And I kind of want to say, isn't he the guy who bought the rights to A God in the Shed by our friend J.F. DeBow?
Hold on.
So I don't want to shit on this at all because I really, really, really want A God in the Shed to become my next Netflix series or whatever. I want to see that happen. So we know at least he's got taste. I don't think I'm speaking out of turn of that. I'm pretty sure I've heard JF say that a number of times in different places, either on his writing podcast or on Mind of a Geek. So
yep,
I really don't think I'm spilling any beans here. Yeah.
No. Yeah, this is on trackingboard.com. Skydance Lands hot manuscript, A God in the Shed from J.F. DuBois with Akiva Goldsman set to produce.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's change your opinions now as you see fit.
I'm not changing my opinions. Like I said, he's done some stuff that I don't like, and he's done some stuff that I probably do like. I don't know his entire list of works, but he's been so prolific. He's done so many different things. You can have a range of awesome to shitty and back again, but he's definitely picked one of my favorite properties in JF stuff. I gotta say, I have a love for the Extreme Universe. It part of it is, yes, it's a lot of, it started out with a lot of kind of copies of Marvel characters or DC characters, like all the Image books did. But I think over time there was something to a lot of those different books that I liked. And I like Rob. I honestly like Rob Liefeld a lot, just as a dude, especially as a family guy. He's a good parent, he's very doting of his kids. His energy is electric. He's fun. He loves comics. He's like the biggest fanboy and admits it, and he also takes knowledge of his faults, like the Captain America chest 5 times bigger than his head thing. He's taken that joke and run with it. He doesn't mind it. It's like, yeah, it gets old maybe at some points, but he's never been a guy who said, "Oh yeah, I'm better than everybody else." You know, maybe he said that in private, but he doesn't say that out loud to the fans. And he treats the fans really well. So I like him, and I hope this works out. And Rob, again, if you're out there and you're listening, I just want to write a Kid Supreme story. You know, that's been my dream since the '90s. You don't have to pay me. I'm just glad to do it because I really like that character. I feel like, yes, we've gone long, but we owe it to mention the final thing, which was Luc Besson's EuroCorp. It got picked up by Netflix, I think. Yeah, we had a little bit of talk about this at before the show. I haven't seen Valerian. We all know the Fifth Element. I've seen a lot of Besson stuff that's a little bit more out there, from things like The Professional or The Big Blue, which was a movie about deep sea divers who don't have equipment. And Nikita. I've never seen the original movie La Femme Nikita. I saw Point of No Return. That was definitely a mistake. So I think Harvey Keitel took over the part of Jacques Renault in that, but I don't remember his name now. But so yeah, Besson is one of those people who doesn't seem to sell tickets. But when people see his stuff, Jean Renault, thank you. When people see his stuff later, they wind up enjoying it, talking about it. So he's not a big blockbuster guy, but he does tell a good story, or at the very least, his stuff is so visually stimulating that you love seeing it. You love looking at it on the screen. The Fifth Element is such a weird movie, and it, in so many ways, it shouldn't work. And I don't know if it actually necessarily did. When it came out in the theater, I don't remember what we went to see instead, but I know we didn't go to see that. But a year later, when it was out on video or on cable, we're like, holy shit, this movie is excellent. And now everybody talks about it like it's one of the biggest things ever. And it kind of is. So I'm glad to see Besson get the ability to do stuff going forward, and someone picked up his stuff, Netflix picking up his stuff. Netflix is great because they don't necessarily need to believe in your product as much as they believe in you as a creator, and they just let you go and do it, and then they put it in front of the audience and let the audience decide, hey, I want to watch this, even if it's just out of morbid curiosity. I think it goes in the same boat as Bright, which was the recent Netflix movie that a lot of people shit on for the story or whatever, but many, many people watched, and we're going to get more of it. I feel like you get this stuff in front of people and they'll see it and they'll go, okay, maybe this isn't the best thing in the world, but I can watch it and I can rewatch it. And maybe I'll warm to it over time, a couple times through, and it'll get either more interesting or funnier or whatever, or it'll just be like the Rocky Horror Picture Show, and I'll watch it out of a morbid curiosity over and over again until I love it and becomes my favorite thing ever. And there is a possibility that more Valerian can happen because of this deal. And a lot of people, everybody I know who saw it, seemed to really like it. It's just nobody saw it.
Yeah, I think that's the problem right there, is that no one saw it in theaters.
I also think that a lot of people had problems with the leads, is that they just didn't have chemistry at all. That's the complaint that I heard the most. But I haven't watched it yet. You've watched it.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that, and it's, I don't know, it's, I liked it. I'll put it this way.
You liked it.
Yeah.
That's the important thing.
I liked it, Mikey. Yeah.
So
if you
basically that's 4 different kind of comic book to film movies or deals that are happening, with Besson doing stuff with Valerian. All these things are big possible production jumps that we'll have to see, what happens in a post Marvel Cinematic Universe world. Are these good moves? Are these bizarre moves? Is Mark Millar the right guy to throw your money at? Maybe. He's had some good success in film so far. Is Rob Liefeld, based off of his only creation that's made it up to the big screen? Yeah, probably. But is that because he's a Marvel character or because he's a Rob character? And with the Valiant stuff, well, I mean, that's basically like Marvel starting 20 years ago instead of 70 years ago.
Yeah.
Who knows?
For more on this Galactic Network podcast, go to gncast.com. That's GNCASTS.com.